Will be on the Infernoid support cards, known as the Void cards. Let's start with the Searcher of the deck, um, Void Vanishment. Once per turn, you can search your deck for a Void card by discarding one card from your hand. That's cost, so you can discard any card, and you can search any Void card in your deck except for Void Vanishment. Should you activate this effect, you can only summon Infernoid monsters for the rest of the turn. It has a secondary effect, which is also pretty good. If an Infernoid monster battles another monster, an Infernoid monster you control battles another monster, you can send this card to the graveyard and banish both cards after damage calculation, regardless of whether the Infernoid was destroyed or not. This effect also doesn't target, so it can deal with big problem monsters. It pretty much makes any Infernoid monster a DD warrior lady. Now, what are we going to search? First, most people are familiar with Void Seer. Quick play spell. You target one Infernoid monster, and that target is unaffected by your opponent's card effects for the entire turn. It has a secondary effect while it's in the graveyard. Should an Infernoid monster or monsters be controlled, you can banish this card from the graveyard instead of one of them being destroyed. Now, important note, your monsters are affected. Your monsters will still be affected by your own card effects, so you can't activate this card and target like a Sajet or something, and then summon a Noku, hoping that he would live. Your card effects will still activate, so you could activate this purposely to put it in the graveyard in order to use its effect to prevent destruction. But your own card effects will affect your monsters. This is a very good card. Its only downside being worse than... it protects you from all card effects, so monster spells and traps. But like something like Forbidden Lance has one advantage over this card, and that is that because that Forbidden Lance actually alters attack and defense, it can be used during the damage step, which could be important. The next card is the Infernoid Fusion card, Void Imagination, which has two primary uses, so it goes above and beyond fusion. First, it is continuous, so it does need to stay on the field for this effect to be active. It reduces the level of all Infernoid monsters whose level is normally higher than 1 to level 1. So that allows you to actually summon additional Infernoids. It does not affect Primaeus, who is already level 1, and it does not affect Decatron, regardless of what monster he's become, because he is normally level 1. So Decatron's level will remain whatever it was, but all other ones are reduced. And while this card is on the field, Infernoid monsters inflict half damage. But there are ways to remove this from the field yourself to increase your damage. The obvious one is to fusion summon using it. Now, to fusion summon with this card, you send it to the graveyard, and you send the required fusion material from your hand to the graveyard. Now, this has an additional aspect of that effect. If your opponent controls a monster that was summoned from the extra deck and you do not, you can additionally use up to 6 monsters from your deck as part of the fusion summon. So generally you'll only use this card when your opponent does have a monster summoned from the extra deck and you do not. And because it only works when you do not, you can't fusion summon more than 1 tiara at a time that way without removing it from the field yourself. And since most of your monsters contribute off a monster to banish a card in the graveyard or negate a spell or trap or a monster effect, you can usually get rid of the tiara and then fusion summon again in the same turn. Next we have the field spell, Void Expansion. Void Expansion has several effects. The first is that during your standby phase, you can special summon 1 Infernoid token, a level 1 Fire Fiend type monster. It's considered a normal monster. It has no effect. It has 0 attack and defense during your standby phase. The field spell gives you an additional way to banish cards to summon Infernoids. You can also then banish monsters on the field in addition to the graveyard and your hand. So the tokens can be used for the summon. They can also be used as tributes for banishing cards or negating spells and traps. Additionally, while this card's on the field, your opponent can only target the highest level Infernoid on the field for attacks or effects. So should Tiara be on the field with any other Infernoid, Tiara would be the only targetable Infernoid. If you play this card with Imagination as well, there's a chance that your opponent will be able to attack any monster because all your monsters are level 1, except for potentially a Decatron whose level's been altered. The next card doesn't really fit in with the deck, but it technically can be searched with Void Banishment, so I did include it. That is Into the Void. If you have 3 or more cards in your hand, you can draw 1 card, and during the end phase of this turn, you discard all cards in your hand. Now, the cards in this deck are essentially expendable. All the monsters are. You can just throw them away. But drawing 1 card is not a productive use of this deck in any way. If you wanted to try and run it as a 37-card deck by just shorting yourself 3 cards, you could do that, because you can set all the spells and trap cards, and discarding the monsters doesn't really do anything negative to you, except for Decatron. Additionally, you can only summon the little ones from your hand, so should you throw them away, they become purely fodder for the other monsters. Next is Continuous Trap, Void Purification. If you control a non-Infernoid monster, Void Purification is sent to the graveyard. That effect also applies to Void Launch. During your opponent's standby phase, you can target 1 Infernoid monster in your graveyard and add that to your hand. During your standby phase, you can target 1 banished Infernoid monster and return it to your graveyard. So this card allows you to recycle your resources. Void Launch says that during your standby phase, only yours, you can send 2 Infernoids from your deck to the graveyard. If you control a non-Infernoid, this card is sent to the graveyard. It's not destroyed, so you can't protect it using some other effect. And the last Void card is Eye of the Void. Eye of the Void allows you to special summon 1 Infernoid monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning condition, but its effects are negated until the end of the turn. This card has some use. It's probably the least useful one, but it has use. Because of the level restriction in the deck, you generally need to get a 3rd monster on board in order to deal 8,000 damage in a single turn. So this would allow you to drop 1 additional monster. Because it ignores the summoning condition, you're not bound by the level 8 or higher, levels over 8 rule. So that's one use for it. Additionally, you do not have to banish to summon an Infernoid, so should your opponent be blocking you with a card such as Imperial Iron Wall, you can still summon the monster using this card instead. And that covers all of the Infernoid support that's actually part of their archetype, and in the next video we'll talk about generic support you can use with the deck.